Mao said like he didn't really care if China got struck by a nuclear weapon because,
there's more people.
Yeah, like if a bunch of people die, yeah, you got more. And that's something the U.S. could not do.
Right.
But
and that's why they have. This is why, and this gets into the idea of PLA version of deterrence is basically what we call preemption. In other words, I'm going to go on the offense, and I'm going to attack my adversary, and I'm going to basically hope for a big psychological impact, and then say, you know what, maybe it's not a good idea we escalate this further. Maybe you should just go aside. Let me share a scenario with you that I've given at other times about what happens in the lead up to a actual kinetic conflict between the U.S. and the PRC. Let's say Taiwan, because that's the big favorite right now. The PRC is getting ready to invade Taiwan, and they don't want the interference of the U.S. So they know that the U.S. is very reliant on their assets, including GPS, intelligence gathering satellites, communication satellites, what have you. PRC launches a couple of missiles, takes out a couple of satellites, and maybe jams a few others, and this sets the U.S. back on their heels. There's U.S. commanders are basically, oh my God, we lost all these things. Now, people will say, well, they won't do that because, it's going to contain all the space debris and stuff like that. I say rubbish, because they're not worried about the space environment. They want the psychological impact. And nothing says psychological impact like actually smashing a satellite. That gets your attention. So basically afterwards, if you degrade them enough, you can basically go to the U.S. and say, look, maybe you shouldn't interfere with us because it could get a lot worse for both sides. So let's just leave us alone. Let us do what we want to do. And, everybody will be happy. No more deaths. I mean, that is actually their doctrine, and people don't understand that their version of just like winning, their version of winning is different. Their version of deterrence is different as well.
So it's kind of like manipulating the idea of mutually assured destruction for their benefit. Like, okay, we don't want to get into, we're both atomic powers. We don't want to have a nuclear war. Let's just, things are already hot. Just give us Taiwan, and then we're done.
Do you want to get real scary?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Back in 2021, I believe it was, 2022, the Chinese tested what was called a fractional orbital bombardment system. Now, what happens with fractional orbital bombardment? The Soviets actually deployed this back during the Cold War. Is it actually, instead of just going up on a ballistic trajectory and then coming down, it actually gets into partially goes into orbit, but it doesn't complete a full orbit. But the idea is it skims along and on a non-ballistic trajectory, and then drops its warhead out of orbit over the target at a very shallow angle. In the case of the Chinese vehicle that was tested, the actual vehicle was a hypersonic glide vehicle that could be armed with a nuclear warhead. Now, conventional missile defense we have is actually designed for incoming RVs that have a ballistic trajectory. In other words, very sharp, steep trajectory. They're not designed for a shallow trajectory where something can maneuver. So here's my scenario. The Chinese want to start some major actions. They want to keep the U.S. out of it completely, and basically they want to shape. They want to shock the political leadership, and basically they want to scare the population as well. Based on information they've received, they've acquired from balloon flights over U.S. ICBM fields, they do their targeting and select several targets from say the missile fields, the bomber bases, what have you. Now that would still leave the missile defense, the missiles in the submarines undersea that they don't see, and they don't. But the idea is they want to stop the U.S. from retaliating from a strike. So what do? They launch these fractional orbital bombardment systems. They select missile fields. They take out the missile fields. They take out the bomber bases, and basically neutralize the land-based nuclear deterrent force. Then they go through their diplomatic channels, and or they go directly to the White House, called directly to the White House, said, look, if you retaliated with your submarine launched missiles, we could really, things could get really ugly, because then we'd have to retaliate with everything we have, and the Russians probably do it too, and we'd have nuclear holocaust. We don't want nuclear holocaust, and neither do you. So why don't we just stand out? Why don't you stand down from any retaliation, and we'll call it even. Now, obviously, after multiple nuclear explosions, on military targets, on nuclear targets, the population is going to be scared, and with social media, the fear factor will be exponential. I mean, we're talking to the nth power type of type of influence, and you could actually and the president might actually decide, and I'm not pointing to any particular president whatsoever, but the president might decide, you know what, instead of retaliating with the full force of our submarine ballistic missile capability, we're going to avoid further potential deaths in our cities. We're just going to basically back down. In other words, surrender.
Well, so what's the difference between that and like Pearl Harbor? Because Pearl Harbor actually galvanized the population and Congress to declare war when they originally were not going to.
I think, and again, I'm gonna pin this on social media. I think because social media, the generation now is basically conditioned in a sense. I don't think we'd have that same sort of uprising or like 9/11, that same sort of unity, or say we got to retaliate, especially like nuclear weapons are the big game changer, and something like that where if the PRC limited their strikes to the missile fields, to the bomber bases, without really attacking the large population centers, I think public opinion would be so the upswell of public opinion would be so great that the political leadership would be forced to say, you know what, we got to not retaliate and basically let what the PRC do what they want to do. That's my ultimate scary scenario. It doesn't keep me up at night, but it does scare me every once in a while.
I mean, I guess what I'm wondering is if the CCP did this, or if they did, let's say, like your less scary scenario of like targeting some US satellites and, destroying them. Like, I don't see how that wouldn't be considered like a direct attack on the US, right? So then, like, isn't that like possibly an overcalculation to think that they could take out a few satellites and then convince the US to not help Taiwan?
The whole idea behind the three warfares is to achieve a political objective. In other words, we want to create a situation where we can get the political leadership to do what we want to do without having to resort to kinetic force. If you can condition society through that. Well, let's put this for example. If you start whacking on top of defense satellites like GPS, like reconnaissance and communication satellites, I start going after geosynchronous targets. I have the Chinese tested a system back a couple years ago where they actually went into geosynchronous orbit and went up to one of their dead Beta 1 Phase 1 satellites and actually grabbed onto it and flipped it out into a graveyard orbit. And our space situational awareness capabilities actually watched this, saw this happening. Now, everybody was quiet for a while, but I looked at it and basically saying, I'll know a space weapon when I see it. That was a space weapon demonstration, in my opinion. That was an ASAT demonstration. What if they did that to a communication satellite? What if I'm watching the Super Bowl on cable TV and the PRC attacks a communication satellite that's actually broadcasting the Super Bowl? That's going to strike home. What if I swipe my credit card to get gas and it can't get through because they interfered with one of my satellites? Now you're directly affecting the civilian population and not just the civilian, not just the military aspect of the nation.
So if they interrupted the Super Bowl, I think we would declare war on them.
Well, that all comes down to whether or not to declare war is a policy decision. That's got to come from the commander in chief.
I guess I wonder if this is how they see deterrence, and are they seeing the US clearly in, like, you talk about mirroring, right? Like the US and what other Western countries assume that like the CCP would think the same as they would on certain issues. But I wonder if it could work in reverse to the detriment of the CCP as well. That like if they assume that like, if blasting a communication satellite during the Super Bowl would make people scared, but it actually makes people upset. Mm-hmm. Like the spy balloon thing, I think, it wasn't clear to the CCP or really to the Biden administration how upset like people would get over it.
Yeah,
right?
People weren't scared in America. They were just angry.
Exactly, because they violated our national airspace. There's this gentleman back many centuries ago named Sun Tzu, and he wrote this really nice little thing called The Art of War. It's about that thick. there's many translations out there. The James Clavell is the best, I think. Um, there, Sun Tzu has this maxim. He was the ultimate guerrilla warfare. I mean, he was the ultimate guerrilla warfare. He basically codified it in the art of war. But he says if you know three maxims: if you know the enemy, but if you don't know yourself, you're going to lose a lot of battles. If you know yourself but don't know your enemy, no, you're still going to lose a lot of battles. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you'll prevail every time. So and the Chinese, they latch onto that and they study us. They study our greatest military tactician who was Karl von Clausewitz. They actually study Clausewitz because that's a big foundation of what our military strategy and philosophy is based on, Clausewitz. So they study him. One of the greats who passed away was Andy Marshall. He was the head of the Office of Net Assessment for decades, and he was really awesome. And he understood this. He understood this, that you've got to really. And in his later years, even after he retired from the Office of Net Assessment, he really studying China. Beforehand, he was studying the Soviets. We got to understand the Soviets, and they never and it was about clear as it was basically very, very murky out understanding. And of course, the Soviets in the same state didn't really understand us as well. So this is why you have intelligence agencies. Not only you're trying seeing what they're up to, you're trying to understand them and understand what is motivating their decision making process.